I'm the host of the Snug Wrestling Podcast. With me today, Jayfromdmv is back on the show. Jay, thanks for coming on in such short notice. How you doing?
I'm doing all right, Edgar. How you doing, man?
I'm good. I'm excited. I want to get your thoughts on what everyone has been talking about lately. The big elephant in the room is
hmm
the AEW Grand Slam, but not just the actual matches and the show. Besides that, everyone's talking about the 16 by 16 ring that they used for this event. So
hmm
that's what we're gonna talk about today. And if we have enough time, we'll get into some of like the actual matches. Now, for me, I wasn't able to watch the actual show because it was Valentine's Day, the middle of the night. It wasn't for the
hmm
lack of trying, but were you able to
Yeah.
catch Grand Slam?
I caught bits and pieces of it. I was able to watch like a good second half of it. But because of the time and day it fell on, my schedule was a little tight, but I was able to go back and watch the full thing the next day, though.
And how was it overall? Like, what did you think of the show?
Overall, the show was good. I mean, in ring wise, the show was great. I can't really complain about that. I mean, when it comes to in ring, AEW is up there with some of the best in ring, but it wasn't a bad show.
Okay, so you think that like, because from when I'm watching it, I mean, from where I'm standing, because I didn't actually watch it, I saw the
hmm
reports, I saw the pictures, and the first thing that I thought was like, man, this looks so weird. Just like you
hmm
could tell, like right off the bat, the size of the ring really stood out to me like a sore thumb. Like,
Right.
so my first question is what because you saw some of the matches, did the
hmm
size of the ring, did you feel like it affected the matches in a negative way at all?
Not in a negative way. Visually, it did look weird because you're just so used to seeing it in a 20 by 20. So to shrink it, it just did look like it was just it made it look not as a big grandiose kind of thing, but it aesthetically it did look weird. It just felt like the wrestlers didn't have the same amount of room. But again, it's 16 by 16 versus 20 by 20. So in terms of it affecting the matches, no. Visually, it was something to try to get used to because I'm just used to seeing a bigger ring. That's
Yeah.
really it. But in terms of the action, I don't feel like it affected it. I think the wrestlers did well in a smaller ring. But visually, for me as a consumer and as a fan, it did look kind of weird. It looked like one of those indie shows where you see them in a significantly smaller ring. So aesthetically, it did visually affect it a little bit.
So in a way, you think that it actually, you could say that it maybe made the matches better because the ring was smaller, you think?
I think so. I think with less room, I mean, it didn't make it look like they were so far apart. But I think it helped them in a way. For some of the wrestlers that like to jump, they didn't have to worry about jumping so far across the ring. Those extra 4 feet, helped it out too. So I don't think it affected the matches at all. I mean, I can understand nitpicking and saying, "Oh, the ring was a lot smaller." Visually, it just took me a little bit to get used to. But other than that, I thought the matches weren't affected by it at all. So,
Yeah, well, that's good. I mean, I'm not surprised that the size of the ring didn't really affect the matches because, I mean, you said it. It kind of gave it like a more like an independent show type feel, and I'm
yeah.
sure like a lot of these guys and girls who have wrestled in the independents for many
hmm
years before going to AEW probably have wrestled in a ring that size number of times. So
Right.
it was probably not something for them that was hard to get used to. Um, but again, like you mentioned it, and I agree. It's kind of indie of them
hmm
to go this way. But my thing is, and this is where I start to get picky, is like AEW is not an indie promotion.
Right.
They're not, they're in a national cable, company where the best wrestle,
hmm
and and to me that just, I don't think that's a good look. Now I saw that the reason, I'm not too sure what the reasoning is behind it. I should have looked it up, but do you know why this happened? The whole thing with the ring?
Um, I mean, I didn't read up why. I'm assuming that they couldn't ship. I'm assuming that they couldn't ship the regular size ring, or maybe it was because of the size of the arena that they had to downgrade. Because I know that they had originally been booked into a bigger arena, and I think because of the number of tickets sold or the amount of people that bought tickets, they had to go into a smaller venue. So I think the size of the arena is maybe what took place in making the ring smaller because
Mm.
it was a smaller venue. And I think that's, and I don't know if you saw this part, but a lot of the fans when Tony Khan came out, they were booing him because I think a lot of people had bought tickets in advance and they had to shrink the venue because of the, I think the price of the tickets or the number of tickets that were sold. So they had to, so a lot of fans were booing him because of that.
That,
So I'm assuming
yeah.
it has to do with the size of the arena that they couldn't put a 20 by 20 in there.
No, that's right, and I'm glad that you brought that up too. That was
Hmm.
another thing too that ended up becoming like a big deal that some of the fans were even kind of upset about, was like, hey, the way that this was promoted to the fans out there in Australia was this was supposed to be a pay-per-view, and it was
Yeah.
supposed to be at like a big stadium,
Stadium. Yep.
and it went from that to being a collision taping in an
Hmm.
arena. And then on top of that, this whole thing with the ring, just to me, from my point of view where I'm standing, this whole thing was just a complete fucking mess from like the beginning. It what wasn't it,
Yeah.
or what do you think about that?
I mean, you could look at it that way. Yeah. I mean, and it's hard, and I know a lot of people are not going to like this, but when you promise the fans one thing and you have to change it last minute, I mean, I'm not sure how last minute it was, but when it is supposed to be this big event and a lot of fans who can't travel internationally, and you give them that, I think you got to go all out, and no pun intended, but when you go international, you got to deliver.
Mhm.
You know, you got to find your ways, and a lot of people talk about Tony Khan being this millionaire billionaire, and you got to make, find a way to make it work, especially for the international fans who don't get that many American style wrestling events. So I think it was a big, I don't want to say fumble because I feel like the event was still successful, in ring wise with some of the things. But when you travel internationally, you can't fuck that up. I'm telling you, you can't. So for them to and then the thing is spoilers. You had all these spoilers on Twitter and all that stuff from people who were there from the tapings, spoiling all that for the fans too. So that's another big, disappointment. If it was a pay-per-view, it shouldn't have been done that way. That's like one of the things. Whether you hate it or not, WWE would never do that in a pay-per-view setting at all.
Tell me more
So
about that. Like, what do you mean spoilers? Because like I feel like it's kind of hard nowadays to avoid spoilers because
right.
I mean, I if I'm not watching Raw, for example, live, then I can just go
Hmm.
on Twitter and all the results are there.
That's
So,
exactly what that's exactly what happened. People at the event were recording the results, so I knew that Buddy Matthews had lost to Okada before the event came out later that night. So people were posting the match results,
oh,
and you could see, and I saw that Tony Storm won, the women's world title before the event. So all that stuff was being posted on Twitter. So that's another thing that people were upset about because all the spoilers were coming out.
oh,
And
I
even
see
on
what you're
Instagram,
saying.
some
Yeah.
of those wrestling the wrestling news sites were posting the results on Instagram too. So that's another, you know, fumble right there because now it's a pay-per-view setting and all the spoilers are out. So
Oh,
that's another
okay.
thing.
Damn, I
Yeah.
didn't even think about that because, like, for me,
Mhm.
when I was supposed to watch it, it aired
Mhm.
in my Pacific time. It was Friday.
Mhm.
Friday was the 14th, right? Yeah.
Right, right.
So that was Valentine's Day. It was supposed to start at 11:30 p.m. on my time, Thursday,
Okay.
Friday night, going into Saturday
Mhm.
morning.
Mhm.
So I was thinking because it was in Australia, it was going to be live, but that was recorded
Hmm.
previously, and then they aired it at that time.
Yeah, so it was being recorded, and it was being so then it was supposed to, because here in Virginia it was supposed to play at 10:30.
Hmm.
So yeah, so by the time it was recording and stuff, um, it was like the spoilers were coming out. So it was supposed to air on Max at 10:30 here, and people were already posting spoilers on Twitter. So that's why it was
Oh,
coming
okay,
up here already. Yeah.
okay. Um, I just have a couple more questions for you, Jay. I know you're busy and you got stuff to
No,
do,
you're
so I'll
no,
keep it.
you're good.
Yeah, I'll keep it short. So there was one injury that people believe that it was due because of the ring, and I don't know if you saw this, but Buddy Matthews actually ended up twisting his ankle during his entrance. Did you
Right.
catch a wind of that?
I did catch that, but I thought it was just he had injured his ankle when he was just jumping into the ring. So I don't know if it was due to the actual ring itself. But if you look at it, it was during his entrance when he was like jumping off the rope and he just kind of sprained his ankle on the way in. So
Hmm.
that's how I saw it. I don't know if it was due to the ring, but it was right at in the middle of him trying to get into the ring is when you see him sprain his ankle. So it wasn't like it was during the match. It was like right in the entrance and he was just coming off the rope and he twisted his ankle. So that's how that injury happened.
Yeah, well, according to Sports Cada, and also Buddy Matthews himself tweeted something about that when he
Hmm.
injured himself before the match. He was, making his way into the ring, and Sports Cada first said that it was that during the entrance due to holes in the padding. So that's
Oh,
so that's one thing.
okay.
And then Buddy Matthews also tweeted something after the match. Um, if it wasn't a 16 by 16 shit wrestling ring, then this wouldn't have happened. So basically, Buddy Matthews ended up deleted the tweet, but he kind of
Ooh,
he kind of like said it kind of like in storyline mode, like, hey, I lost
yeah,
because,
yeah.
making excuses of why he lost. But do you think that maybe it was the ring, the reason that Buddy Matthews got injured before the match, unfortunately?
Unfortunately, probably if you were to tweet something like that, there's got to be some truth behind that. Because I don't feel like he is the kind of person just to tweet random shit like that. Because if it was because of and that means that the ring wasn't set up properly too. If there were holes in the padding, so
Mhm.
that already shows you that it was already a hand me down wrestling ring too. So
Yeah. And
yeah,
one last question, Jay, before I let you go.
yeah.
So it did you hit it right on the head with this one. It does look like a hand me down ring. It looked like kind of like
Hmm.
a toy wrestling ring, and with like a lot of fans saying, "Oh, this is like AEW is like an indie promotion where they do the video game style." It kind of did give it that indie feeling watching this,
Hmm.
the size of the ring. But at what point do you feel like the fans and AEW fans need to stop making excuses and be more demanding? Like, hey, these are people that are paying fucking
Hmm.
$500, maybe even more for front row tickets to these shows. I feel like AEW should at least give the people what they deserve, which is like a professional presentation
which
of.
which is quality stuff. Yeah,
And not to say that their
I think
matches aren't quality. Maybe they, the
mhm.
matches probably make up for it, but still, I think presentation is important, right?
I think so too. I think people tend to want to coddle AEW a lot because it's a still a newer promotion. But I think they have to set expectations for them because how long are you going to coddle a company that's been around 5, 6 years at this point, and for them to put their wrestlers in a weird situation where they potentially got injured alone in their entrance, I think that they're blinded by, oh, WWE bad, AEW good. And I think that's where they're losing sight of, well, maybe if we set some expectations, you know, they will do better. But I feel like I don't think AEW diehards are ready to do stuff like that because they still coddle the company like they just started yesterday. And the thing is, when you set when AEW and people like Tony Khan put out there, oh, we're the best wrestle. Well, I mean, you gotta set that standard. You gotta go balls to the wall with how you set things up, presentation, cameras, pyro, all that stuff. Like you wanna seem like you're better than WWE. Yeah, you do that in the ring, but you got to do it as a full presentation. You got
Yeah.
to set those expectations and set those boundaries. If a lot of people hold WWE accountable for having a Prime logo in the middle of a Raw ring and they bitch about it, then you got to set the same expectations about AEW going from a 2020 ring to a 16 by 16, and one of your premier athletes roll their ankle when they just do their entrance because of poor setup.
Hmm.
So I think if everybody wants to hold WWE accountable for all the stuff that they do, at some point you got to hold AEW to the same standards. If not, then they're eventually not going to succeed because visually it's not aesthetically pleasing. And if wrestlers get hurt in your shitty ass ring, then they're not going to want to wrestle.
Yeah,
So
dude. I mean, like, uh, I don't want to get heat for comparing like AEW to WWE all the time, but like I'm gonna compare this to like real sports. Like
yeah,
at some point, if what's your favorite sports team, Jay?
like in football, the Giants.
The Giants. All right. So the Giants are,
Oh,
they're having their teams, their players play
mm,
on like shitty fields or like smaller fields or something.
yeah,
Like as a fan, wouldn't the fans would not let that slide. The fans would
right.
fucking call it out and say, "Hey,
Hmm.
this ownership, we need new ownership or something.
Yep.
We're not going to allow this." Like other sports fans are not that like forgiving
Right.
when it comes to things like this. So people have asked the question, what does AEW have to do in order to improve? And a lot of people say, well, they need to get rid of Tony Khan. I'm not saying that. But at some
Right.
point, the fans have to be a little bit more demanding and demand more from the owners or like the company of AEW in order to improve.
Right.
It just seems like they're just too busy just defending
Well,
it
I think,
and making excuses for
yeah,
it. Hmm.
I think, and that's what it is. Like, again, they have this big crop of great wrestlers in AEW, and the thing is, if your wrestlers are getting hurt because of the situation that they're supposed to perform in, then what does that say about you as a company not putting out your best foot forward to make it safe, a working safe environment? I'm talking about in the ring. I'm not talking about backstage or anything like that. But if your wrestlers are getting hurt in the ring because of the setup, not even because of a wrestling match, then that at that point you got to call out Tony Khan and anybody else who is allowing that stuff to happen. You got to hold them accountable. I mean, everybody holds Triple H and Vince McMahon and all that stuff. I mean, look, let's not compare AEW to WWE. Look at TNA. You can compare those two. That's probably a better comparison. And still, TNA got so much flack from going from the eight-sided ring to a four-sided ring, but even wrestlers were saying it's a safer way to wrestle. AJ Styles said it plenty of times. So if that's the case, that means they made it safe for their wrestlers to wrestle in a 4x4 instead of an eight-sided ring or a six-sided ring, whatever it was. Safer for the wrestlers. You got to hold AEW and Tony Khan accountable for that. So it's
Hmm.
safer, and again, people are going to get hurt if we got a shitty ass setup like that.
Yeah. All right. I know I said I had that was the last question, but just one last question, and this is just like a
Yeah.
hypothetical because obviously I'm not a professional wrestler, nor do I ever claim to be. But say if you were put in that situation and you're like, oh, by the way, you're gonna wrestle in this smaller ring, like. I don't know if
Hmm.
you're like a big star, like if you're like a Kenny Omega or like a Will
Hmm.
Osprey. I mean, what are the possibilities of if you were in that situation to just tell Tony Khan, "Hey, I'm not gonna go out there. I'm not gonna risk myself. Like, I'm too good for this." Like,
Yeah.
at what? I mean, would you like Can you imagine doing something like that, or would you just be like, you know what, I'm all for the company. I'm just gonna go out there and do it anyway. Or what are your
Well,
thoughts
and I
on
think
that?
those are probably two people that you shouldn't pick in order to question that, because if you would have put them in a 4x4 ring, they'll go out there and be like, "Oh, I'm going to do this for the fans and still compete." I think with Buddy Matthews is the perfect example, because he's the perfect example of somebody who got hurt in a situation, whether he tweeted that in storyline or in real life on how he got hurt. It you see proof that he got hurt because of how it was set up. And if I'm not gonna put myself in a situation like that, because I'm not a wrestler either. But mentally, you got to prepare to go from a certain position in wrestling to a smaller position, and you got to physically and mentally prepare yourself for that. And 4 feet is a big difference. Whether
It's a big difference, dude.
it's a big difference, and it takes up a lot of you lose a lot of room with space, and with people who are used to wrestling in a bigger size ring, they have to account for those 4 feet going four ways in order for it to work out.
Yeah.
So yeah,
Well, with that, Jay, thank you for coming on to the show. This was a quick one. I hope you guys
yeah.
enjoyed it. Let us know what you guys think in the comments. Leave a star rating and leave a review. And Jay, tell the people where they can find you.
You can find me on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram at DJX Cruise everywhere. I know I changed my name a lot, but that's the last time. But you can follow me on all platforms. I talk wrestling, I talk video games, and I like to piss people off.
Right on, Jay.